Chapter 4, A Tour of the Cell. So we'll start out at looking at the fact that cells are microscopic. That means you have to have a microscope in order to see them because they are so small. All living organisms are either single-celled, which are the prokaryotes, and what are called protists. And the prokaryotes are those single-celled organisms that we call bacteria, and also another group of single-celled organisms, the archaea. And they are prokaryotic, meaning they do not have a nucleus within their cells. Relatively simple cells, but overall very successful groups because they've been around forever. Well, not forever, they've been around for since the origins of celled organisms, since the origins of life on Earth. And then many protists are single-celled organisms, not all of them, but many of them. And if we were able to look at pond water in lab, you saw that in one of your recent labs, single-celled organisms that are protists are very common in fresh water and some in salt water. And like this thing here, which is an amoeba, and it's eating another single-cell protist, something called paramecium. Okay? Or other organisms are multicelled. All of the plants are multicellular, all of the animals, and most of the fungus or fungi. The only exception are the single-celled yeast within the fungus group or the fungi kingdom. And these are plant cells. Notice they kind of look like bricks, and that's because of what's called the external cell wall on plant cells. So here in figure 4.1, we get a basic size comparison of cells and subcellular structures, and then multicellular organisms. So at the smallest end, notice this is 1/10, 0.1 nanometers or microns. That's the size of atoms. Above that or bigger are small molecules, which get up to about 1 nanometer or micron in size. And then some of the larger molecules, lipids and proteins, ribosomes, which are cellular structures, viruses, think of COVID-19, getting bigger, up to 100 microns. The smallest bacteria are just bigger than viruses. Mitochondria within cells that generate ATP are actually about the size of some bacteria. Most bacteria is in this range, about 10 microns. Actually, I was saying microns down here, but this is nanometers. This is smaller than a micron. This weird-looking U here is actually the micron unit. So this is 1 micron here, and that's 10 microns. So the nucleus of eukaryotic cells is close to 10 microns in size. You're not going to have to remember these units or sizes, but just appreciate how small some things are, and then how big some other things, how big certain other structures are or organisms. Okay? Frog eggs, you can actually see them with the naked eye. 1 millimeter, that's 1 centimeter. We're using the metric system here. 10 centimeters, a chicken egg. Length of some nerve and muscle cells actually can get pretty long. The reason you can wiggle your toes or feel something tickling your toes or something like that is because you have nerve cells that come out of the spinal cord at the base of the spinal column and go all the way down through your legs and innervate your muscles and the skin on your feet. And then some muscles are pretty long, like the muscles in your thighs. They go from your hips all the way down to your knees. And then human height, we're over 1 meter tall on average. So bigger things all the way to small microscopic things. So what I may hold you responsible for is to remember certain relative sizes. So for example, cells are bigger than organelles. Bacteria are smaller than plant and animal cells. Viruses are smaller than either of these types of cells, so forth. Okay? And I won't hold you responsible for knowing these metric unit conversions. Okay, so you do not need to know these. Okay, so continuing on with cells. So we have what's called cell theory. So this is an established understanding in science that all living things are cellular, or anything that's alive is made up of at least one cell. Okay? And all cells come from earlier pre-existing cells. What that means is all of the cells in your body, for example, came from pre-existing cells that underwent cell division. Okay, like mitosis. So here's a cell, it's still connected, so it's one cell undergoing cell division, most likely mitosis, and it's almost at the end of the cell division cycle, and as soon as this separates here, then you'll have two cells that originated from the one original cell. So the one original cell ceases to exist as soon as it divides, and it produces what are usually called two daughter cells. So, and going back to all living things are cellular, if something is non-cellular, it's not considered living by most scientists. So, for example, viruses lack a lot of the cellular structures. So they are not considered living things, which is interesting because, viruses are around, they make us sick. Think of COVID-19. But the flu that people get during the flu season is because we get infected by viruses, and viruses do not have cellular machinery and organelles and stuff. The way viruses reproduce is they have to infect living cells and use these host cells, use their cellular machinery to produce more viral particles or virus particles that will leave the cell, or the cell will rupture, spewing out the new viruses that cell has produced, and then those viruses go infect other cells, and that's what makes us sick. So every cell in your body and in all living organisms was produced by cell division of a previously living cell, as I mentioned, mitosis. So two major categories of cells. I kind of hinted to them a little bit before. Now we'll get into some of the details. So all cells fall into two basic categories or types, and they are the prokaryotic cells, which are cells without a nucleus. They have genetic material, DNA, and that's just within the cell. But they are prokaryotic in the sense that they do not have a nucleus. And these are the bacteria, and then the other group called archaea, which are very bacteria-like. Simple drawing here of a typical prokaryotic cell, always single-celled. Or cells are eukaryotic, meaning they have a nucleus, which we see here in purple, that contains the genetic material, the DNA. So these are all the protists, plants, fungus, fungi, and animals. We are all eukaryotic organisms. All of our cells have nuclei, plural for nucleus. There are some exceptions. For example, our red blood cells, when they're mature and floating in our, being transported throughout our body, carrying oxygen, those red blood cells do not have a nucleus, but that's just because they lost it during development. But if you are a plant, a protist, a fungus, or an animal, we say that you have eukaryotic cells. So cells, all of them have basic features. Let me find my cursor again. Here we go. So they are all surrounded or bound by a plasma membrane, here in yellow. And then in this typical prokaryotic cell, like a bacterium, it has a plasma membrane. Looks like it's also yellow, thin here. And it has an external structure called the cell wall, and even a structure on the outside, a capsule. Typical animal cell has a plasma membrane, but no cell wall. So the plasma membrane allows certain materials to enter or exit the cell, but is a boundary and prevents certain materials from entering and exiting the cell. So it's what's called a semi-permeable membrane. And it is the boundary between the outside environment and the inside environment of a cell. Internally, the cytosol is the liquid-like fluid environment internal to the plasma membrane, and that's in light blue here and in light blue over here. Okay? And it contains all the cellular material components and all of these structures within the cell, the cytosol. You may hear the term cytoplasm as well, and cytoplasm is this location, this area. Cytosol is actually the fluid environment, the liquid that's here. So for us, we can use the terms interchangeably. Cytoplasm, cytosol. Cytoplasm is the location, cytosol is the material. If you use those terms interchangeably, that's okay. So there are one or more chromosomes carrying genetic material, DNA, within the nucleus, or just within the cell if it is a prokaryotic cell, because prokaryotic cells, if you remember, do not have a nucleus. There are ribosomes. These are the structures where proteins are produced. So protein synthesis occurs on ribosomes. And they're color-coded blue here in this eukaryotic cell, and also in blue here in this prokaryotic cell. So that's where protein synthesis occurs on ribosomes. So prokaryotic cells are very old. They're the first living things on planet Earth, and they first appeared about 3.5 billion years ago, BYA. That is a very, very long time ago. The eukaryotic cells, the cells that have a nucleus, are more elaborate cells and more recently evolved, about 2.1 billion years ago, which is a long time ago, but the prokaryotic cells are quite a bit older. So prokaryotic cells are smaller and simpler than the eukaryotic cells, as we saw a couple minutes ago, but they are very successful and they've been around for a very long time. Oh, here we go. So most prokaryotic cells have a cell wall, which provides some rigidity to the cell, protects the cell and helps maintain its shape. And prokaryotic cells can have pili, which are these short projections from the cell, and they usually are involved with allowing the prokaryotic cell to attach to structures. And some prokaryotic cells can have long flagella, which are whip-like extensions that move and beat and allow the prokaryotic cell to move, so for propulsion and movement or locomotion. So here's a little video of a typical prokaryotic cell that's flagellated. Don't worry about the genus or species name. And there's no narration here, but it's a pretty interesting video where they use special lighting where you can see the flagella moving and allowing the prokaryotic cell to zip around in an aqueous or watery environment. Okay, so a typical flagellated, meaning a cell with a flagellum, prokaryotic cell. And again, some prokaryotic cells have flagella, not all of them do. Okay, so moving on to the more recently evolved, more complex and larger eukaryotic cells. And again, karyo meaning the nucleus.